All right, so this week we're going to be talking about transactions. And if you haven't seen the weekly announcement, just to kind of give a brief overview of what transactions do is basically they kind of isolate a set of commands that are basically kept track of so we can undo them if we want. Kind of like if you're familiar with like Git or something like that, it kind of is similar in the sense that, we're going to track changes, but the difference is we have to kind of manually kind of say that that's what we want to do. So just as an example, if I select everything from customer, we can see a bunch of emails in here and it's all movies.com. Let's say that we wanted to, bulk change everyone's email, which I don't know why we would, but we could. I could say update customer set email equal to, and like we could concat this with email and, something like that. Just to kind of give a rough example. But let's say that, we want to, I think the most generic use of this, which I use most of the time, is actually almost like a Control-Z button, an undo button. So before I really do anything in a production server or really any server, any database, I really use transactions because it sure makes things a lot easier to undo. If you mess up, and I know we all like to think that we won't ever mess up, but we do. You forget to put a where clause, you forget to change something, there's always something that's kind of happening. So I like to kind of make sure that, I kind of have my ducks in a row, so to speak. And so I just put it in a transaction just to be sure. But anyways, before we get too deep, the first thing we want to do is turn off auto commit. And so, we've kind of all been doing stuff in our databases in Workbench, but unbeknownst to us, these transactions are happening automatically, meaning that if I were to run this update statement, it automatically commits things, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, which we don't want. In this case, we kind of want to take manual control. So we're going to turn off auto commit. And the way we do that is to say auto commit equals 0. And it says that there's an error. So basically what we need to do is we need to turn it off. So normally this is how you kind of turn it off in command line, but it's not working. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to go to edit and preferences. So edit, preferences, and then we're going to click on the SQL editor tab. And then in here, under query, let's see, somewhere here. We're looking for, let's keep going and see what we got here. SQL editors, MySQL session. Over here, there should be a option, and I think it's in the, see if it's in the notes here or in the exercise here. Review. Ah, that's what I forgot. Okay, so we're going to do set auto commit equal to 0. So we just need to type set auto commit equals 0. And somewhere in MySQL, there's some settings to turn this off automatically. There we go. So now auto commit is off. Set auto commit equals 0. We've turned it off. And maybe I'm thinking of dbeaver. which might be my confusion. But anyways, we're going to turn auto commit off. So that way we can kind of manually take control of this. Then what we're going to do is we want to basically start our transaction. And basically, like I said, a transaction is kind of like a little mini isolated thing where it says like, oh, this user's logged in and we want to keep track of what they do in case we want to undo it. So I'm going to say start transaction. I'm just going to go ahead and run this. And I'm going to go ahead and run this statement, which should update all of our emails. There we go. So now if I select everything from customer again, now we should see that email has this .com.us, and we realize, oh, we didn't want that for whatever reason. So what I can do is I can just type in the keyword rollback. And now if I go look at customer again, you'll notice that it's all back to normal. So basically it's like it never happened, which is really amazing. So usually the way that my kind of workflow works is I make sure auto commits off for MySQL, especially. I kind of have my query to kind of check my data. And then basically what I do is I start my transaction. I do this. I always type rollback next, especially if I'm doing things manually. And then make sure I put some gaps so I don't run the wrong one. So if I were to run this, so just to walk through it again, if I start my transaction, it's an important step. You don't want to forget that. Update customer. And we just changed a bunch of data. So at this point, we can either roll back or commit. If we roll back, it undoes all the changes. If we commit it, it makes them permanent. So in this case, we're going to roll back. So I apologize, my dogs are barking if you can hear them. But anyways, what we're going to do is I wanted to kind of walk through the exercises for this week because they kind of are, I guess, in a way, what they're doing is they're going to walk us through kind of like an actual exercise. So you're going to have to do some things and then answer some questions based on the things that you've done. So anyways, question one actually is just kind of like setting up our data. So it says we need to generate a unit of work to transfer $50 from account 123 to account 789. And basically we have to build two tables. So it says hint, you'll have to build the account and transaction tables, which I have code for you. So you won't have to do that, but you'll have to put it in and run it. And then insert those rows, which I'll give you that as well. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to add this ability for us to transfer funds from one account to another. So let's get to that point real quick. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this here real quick. And what I'm going to do somewhere here, I have already went through the effort of getting these two tables kind of built. So let's put this here. So I'm going to run this one. And what don't you like about this? I'm just going to get rid of these. Rid of those just so it doesn't complain. It's still complaining about something, so we'll see what it is. Because I actually just auto-generated this from the tables I already had, so we'll see what happens. So let's run this and
I run into this all the time when I copy and paste. It has those squiggly lines on that second line there, and it never seems to go away, and I don't understand what that does. It's like it's inserted some weird character.
Yeah, that's kind of what it seems like. So we will just re-put it in there, and this is supposed to be a transaction ID. Wow. So what it's doing is it looks like it doesn't like the carriage return. So what I'm actually going to do is I am just going to open this up in a text editor here real quick. And I'm just going to rip and replace this data. Sometimes all it takes is just to copy from the right place. So depending on where you're copying from. So what I always like to do is I always like to paste into a text editor, raw text editor, to make sure that there's no like hidden formatting. And it looks like it still doesn't like it. So let's try to rip and replace this. So next try is to do this, and we're going to search for carriage returns. And we are going to replace with a manual carriage return. And then we are also going to replace our two spaces with, let's just do nothing. This might be our culprit right there. See that? There's a little missing dot there. So that probably tells me that's the culprit. So let's do that. Good to know. There we go. Let's do the same thing for this one. There we go. So look, yeah, this looks like it had a bad character. So got rid of that. Now let's run these. Oh, and mine already exists. So that's obviously going to be a problem. So I'm going to leave mine there because, but I will make sure. I'm planning on putting these in the announcement with the recording. So if you want to save a little bit of work, I'm going to post this right after the meeting. So that way you don't have to worry about building those yourself. They'll already be done. And then also the other thing I was going to do, which is pretty handy. And I was going to try this in MySQL first. I'm going to select everything from account. I know in dbeaver, there's a way that I can export these as an actual SQL. There we go. It does have it. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to download this as SQL insert statement. So I'm going to call this account inserts.sql. Table name is account. There we go. So now that we have that, we should have our, there it is. So now we have our insert statements as well. So I'm just going to snag these and we can use those to kind of insert our data. One thing I am going to do is instead of this raw data here, I am going to replace this with just a current timestamp. All right, so then we'll have these. I guess we need to put account here. There, okay. So those should be good. And then I'm going to do the same thing for my transactions. Let me make sure this is right. And I haven't changed this before we get going. So our transaction table should have a transaction ID of 1003, our date, which is whatever we want it to be. Actually, I think the dates on those other ones were actually right. If we want it to match, we might as well make it match. So I will just put these back in there. Select everything from transaction. 123. So basically inside this transaction table, you're going to insert a couple records. Each one represents a single transaction. So this transaction is when we debited $50 from account 123. And then this one is when we credited account 789 $50. So basically we took $50 from account 123 and put it into 789 for $50. Yep, perfect. So let's go ahead and same thing. I'm just going to export these. We'll call this one transaction inserts. And there we go. All right, that should save a little bit of time. All right, so now that we have that data, now we can kind of move on and kind of see what the ask is. So it says after use transaction to indicate debit and credits, yada, yada, like we talked about. We requery the account table. We should see the following after you complete your transaction, requery the transaction table, and we should see the following. But anyways, what we want to do is we want to generate a unit of work. And what they mean by unit of work is that we want to build, like, basically think of it like a function, but I might actually end up putting it in a function or a procedure so we can see it. But ultimately we want to kind of build the workflow that would take place in order for us to transfer this money. And again, if you've read the announcement, you've kind of seen this before, but the reason why transactions are especially important when we're dealing with finances is you can imagine, like in this case, if we're transferring money. So let's say you're buying a pizza, for example. And this is the example I used in the announcement. But if you go in to buy a pizza, you swipe your card, they debit your account $15. But at that given moment, there's a network hiccup on the database of the bank. So they debit your account, but the transaction doesn't like finalize, meaning that, Little Caesar never got their money. And so they send you home without your pizza, or you swipe your card again. Let's say you swipe your card again. This time it goes through because there's just a little network hiccup, and you walk out with your pizza, but then you get home and you're checking your bank a couple days later and you realize you got charged twice for the pizza. Even though that money is now kind of lost in limbo. And so anyways, the reason we do transactions is because in that given case, we want to make sure that everything happened. We want to make sure we debited this account, but credited this account. And if something fails somewhere along the way, we want to undo everything. And I like to call that, and it's pretty common, it's called an all or nothing. So, which is pretty common, meaning there's lots of times you might tell someone, hey, like, I need this to be an all or nothing function, meaning that, we want everything to work or none of it to work, meaning that if anything goes wrong, undo everything that you did along the way. Because databases are sometimes you have to do multiple steps, just like you're probably finding with your final projects. I have to insert data into this table, and this table just to get to, the table that I'm actually trying to get data into because, of the dependencies. And so in that case, you might say, hey, I want to insert all this stuff, and it might be that you want to do an all or nothing. So let's kind of go through this little exercise here just to kind of run through a quick example. So we have our accounts, we have our transactions, but what we want to do is we want to, and I think that what was the specific amount? We want to transfer $50 from account 123 to 789. So we want to do it again. Basically, I already have it in there. So it says after we have completed our transaction, requery. And so essentially what we're going to do is kind of walk through this. So, and it actually looks like I kind of have the wrong data in here. So let's real quick fix this. because right now I have transaction. Oh no, that's in the account. So let's check our accounts, make sure. Yep. So right now account 123 has $500 and 789 has $75. When we finish, it should be 450 and 125. Perfect. Yes. And really my transaction table should be a little different. So let's fix our transaction tables to show us basically putting that initial money in. This one will be our old one. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to update the amounts on our transaction. Let's delete them so we can rewrite them. So we're just going to delete everything from transaction. Delete from transaction. And we're just going to copy this. And we're just going to call this initial deposits. And account 123 has $500 and the other one had 50, I believe. Nope, 75. Run this and run this. And now our transactions should be matching what we have here. Transaction, we show our initials of 575. Perfect. And our account tables should show 575 as well. Okay, so now we're kind of to this starting point. And now we kind of want to start building our unit of work to kind of go through this. So I'm going to put you guys up here. Might as well take and put you up there as well. All right, so the first thing we want to do, let's begin. And I always forget because in this one is start transaction. Begin transaction is for SQL Server. So we're going to start transaction, and that's basically going to tell us like, hey, you know, start keeping track of things. And I like to think of this as like, okay, this is when the function starts. So the first thing we want to do is we want to record our transaction. So in what I would probably say is what we want to do is we want to make sure we do everything pretty kind of very clean. So what I'm going to do is the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to debit first account. And before I get too crazy, we need, oh, that is 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's do this. I goofed up. So we're going to delete from transaction again and fix this real quick. There we go. All right, so now back to task. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to debit the first account 123, $50. And so we could run this. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my transaction, which we have, and I made some changes since then. So let's commit, and then let's start a new one. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my first one to debit the account $50. Now we inserted into transaction, so we can see that there's this additional record where we debited it. But if we look at our account, the account still has an available balance of $500. So the minute that we insert this transaction, I also want to make sure that we update account to set the available balance nice here.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
The characters you have in front of the T for transaction and at the end there, that's That's not like a single quote, right?
No, it's actually a backtick.
Yeah, so
Um,
it's that above the tab key, right?
Yes. Yep. And you don't actually need them. It'll put them in there. Basically, that's what MySQL uses to kind of say like, oh, this is like a column name or this is a variable, but it has quotes. So like if you ever have like a space in a column name, it requires the backticks, if that makes sense.
Okay,
Because
so
go ahead.
like in I don't know, it's like putting quotations around a network path or something like that if there's a space in the folder structure naming.
Right, exactly. And the reason why
Okay.
we don't use quotes to do that is because in SQL, quotes are string literal. So like if I type in, account ID, it will literally print account ID, the string.
Okay.
But if I use backticks, then it knows, oh, it's not a string literal. He's trying to refer to a column name.
Okay. So in this case, we don't need to use those.
Right. Yep. It has them there just because I had it MySQL auto generate it, and based on the data that I already had in there, and so it just generated those for me. But we will just take those out because I don't like them. There we go. Good question though. So we've created our transaction record, but we want to make sure we update the available balance. So I'm going to just write this update statement to say, basically just subtract $50 from that account. So now if we go to account, now we see 450 there. And so at this point, we're actually accurate. We've debited that account $50 and we've lessened their available balance. But we want to put that money somewhere because we want to know where it went. So this is where we go to where we're going to credit the second account. And we're going to this time use the C to credit it. And we're going to say update account. Set available balance equal to available balance plus 50, where account ID is equal to 789. All right, so did we ever run this one? Let's see if we did. Okay, so we've never credited this, so let's do our credit. That worked. We can check to make sure it's there, which it is, and then we want to update that account's available balance. So now if we go in there and check, we should have our 450 and 125, which makes sense. So at this point, we would want to commit. But if there were ever an issue, we would want to do a rollback. And the rollback is kind of the magic that happens. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to create the procedure. Basically, the procedure is basically a function. So you can kind of see that we really have three variables here. We have, the original account. We have the account we're moving the money to, and then we have an amount. So if we were going to do this, we would say create procedure. And, I'm just going to call this transfer. And let's see, we want to this is where we can give essentially our data. So what data do we want to basically go in? Well, we want to pass in. So I say in, and here we can say kind of what we want. So I'm going to say account, let's say original account Sorry. So we're going to say original account, and we're going to give it int because that's what our data type is. So in original account int, and then from here we can kind of go through our list of parameters. So in destination account int in amount, and that is a decimal 15.2, which is pretty standard money decimals. All right, so there is that. So now what we can do is we can say begin. And so a lot of this stuff you guys have never seen before, like the procedures, but it's not too crazy. It's basically like any other kind of function we've seen before. So I'm going to build an exit handler. And what the exit handler is going to do is it's basically going to, the exit handler is going to be the code that runs when we have any error. And we can manually specify certain errors, but I just like to use SQL exception for the generic one. So basically, if there's any problem, this section is going to run. And so now I'm going to say begin. So inside of our thing, and I'm going to say show errors because we want to see what the errors are. And obviously, if there's any errors, we're going to roll back. And then I put end here, and we should be good to go. So that is our exit handler. Oh, and I need 4. There we go. You know that for now. All right, and now what we want to do is let's go ahead and finish kind of our procedure. So at this point, we would say, okay, we want to start our save point. Oh, we never talked about save points. So save points are essentially a way for us to not only start a transaction, but to kind of give it a name. So we could have, multiple kind of checkpoints along the way and choose where we want to go, if that makes sense. So a couple different kind of options here, but anyways, we'll just kind of keep going here because basically it's like a save point in a video game. If you save the place and you go into the dungeon and things don't work out the way you wanted them to, you can always kind of go back to where you were, and that's essentially what a save point is. So we're going to start our save point. We're going to give it a name. And I'm just going to call this pre_transaction. Transaction is kind of how transaction. There we go. So pre-transaction. And now we can kind of go through our setup here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take and copy our exact stuff we did. Paste it in here because that should be exactly what we need. And now, because we hit commit here, we can simply end this. So let's go here, say end. All right, so basically what this is doing is we kind of declare like a little mini thing. So if there is any exception, we're going to show the errors, roll back any work we've done. And so just keep in mind, if we ever hit an error, this is going to run. But ultimately what we have here is we start our save point is the first step we do. Then we begin our work. And if we make it all the way to here, that without, having an exception or an error, it's going to commit, which is perfect. So that's exactly what we want. Anyway, so let's actually make this a our procedure here. So what I'm going to do, didn't want to exit it. So what we can do is here under stored procedures, I'm just going to right click the stored procedure, say create stored procedure, and I'm going to just paste this right here. And we have to create it this way because in the normal script, it kind of gets confused about certain things. So we're going to call this transfer. Okay, so it actually looks like it's just going to go. I'm going to apply this. Oh, but so this will automatically do our 50. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we actually put in the correct values here. So instead of manually adjusting the same accounts every time, we want to actually use original account, amount, destination account, and same thing here. So we're just gonna, we'll actually just completely take this out. And by the way, you guys do not have to go through all this. You could just do that first step we did where we make it work. But I just want to kind of walk through this. Timestamp. Original account, debit for amount. Take out the transaction ID so it can auto increment, which hopefully I have that turned on. And we are going to have this be current timestamp. Destination account, credit, and amount. There we go. So now we should be good. So now it's all completely kind of isolated there. And there we go. So now we have this transfer procedure. So now let's procedure call. So now if I go back here, now that we've kind of created this procedure, I should be able to just call it. So in this case, we are just going to call transfer. And this is where we can put in our data. So let's say we want to transfer some money from, and real quick, let me make sure I have this on auto increment. Okay, perfect. So we want to transfer money from 123 to 789. Actually, let's go backwards. Let's take our $50 back. So we're going to go from 789 to 123, and we are going to move our $50. Now, a moment of truth here. We're going to run this, see what happens. There we go. Everything seemed to work. So now if I select everything from account, we should be back up to $575. So you can see with this transaction, it's pretty cool because now we can just call, our two, and let's say we want to move $150. Now, if we go up to our account, we have moved the money and we can see all of our transactions taking place. So anyways, pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff. But let's simulate something going wrong. So let's say that 123 exists, but let's say all of a sudden 789 doesn't exist anymore. So let's delete from account. Real quick before I do that, let me make sure I have all of our start data here. I want to make sure that I don't delete that before we go. Okay. So let's delete from account. where account ID is equal to 789. So let's also delete from transaction. Well, is it a foreign key? No, it's not. So we can delete. So we haven't built our database right because there's no foreign key from transaction to account. So what that means is, like, let's say someone hits the wrong button and whoops, I've deleted someone's account, right? It's gone. Now, if we were to try to run this again, you'll notice that everything worked, but if we go up here to account, we should expect to see, so we have $200. Let's run again here. You can see that we're still taking money out of that account, even though really it shouldn't be really working. And that's largely because we don't have our database set up right to where it can insert. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to fix that real quick. So let's delete from transaction. Let's just start over. Let's delete from account. There we go. So let's actually drop both those tables just to make this easy. Drop table account and drop table transaction. So we're going to just drop both those tables. And now what we're going to do is down here on our transaction table, we want to make an account ID a foreign key. So I'm going to say constraint transaction FK1 foreign key account ID references. Okay, so let's create our account table. And now we're going to create our transaction table, this time with the foreign key, because you could see how that was problematic because we were just kind of inserting our, data to an account that doesn't exist, which we don't want. Okay, so there's our accounts, and we want our initial deposits. There we go. So everything is working fine. Let's see our accounts. Let's see our transactions. Okay, so we're kind of back to where we started. This time we're set up proper. Now, this time what I'm going to do, so just to kind of simulate it, again, I'm pulling money from 123 into 789 for $150. So if we go back and take a look at our account, we see, okay, that worked. We took 150 from one, moved it into the other. Now let's simulate that. Let's say that there's an account that someone deleted, or which technically now is impossible, but we're just going to say that there's a 790 account, right? Now we know that that account doesn't exist, which, if we didn't run these transactions, we would still be debiting money from 123, which is what we want to check. So now you can see we're getting expected results that we wanted. So because we hit a SQL exception, you'll notice that because we had that show errors right here, it's actually kicking out the error code. So it says error. The error code is 1452, and it says cannot add or update child row. The foreign key constraint fails. So we should be able to go up here to our account, and our account balance should be the same, which is 150. So I could run this 10 times, and it's always going to come back as successful, but it's just going to tell us the error message, which is perfect. And notice that our balance remains the same, which is exactly what we want. Does that make sense to everybody? Clear as mud. I'm just going to get to where the end result is here. Oops. 7. 9 for 50. And this should be our end result here. I mean, obviously we have a lot more transactions, but end result should be 40 and 125. All right, so past that, there's a couple of multiple choice questions. And then question 4 is similar in the sense that it talks about a stored procedure. And it basically is, again, another multiple choice where you have to kind of choose what's going to happen. And same thing with question 5. So that's a lot of why I wanted to kind of show the procedure so you can kind of make sense of this. So knowing that it's going to be on the exercises, does anyone have any questions about these transactions and particularly these stored procedures? All right, perfect. Well, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, on the create procedure transfer, that's the basic template that we follow.
Yes, and so what I would do to kind of start off is over here, and I know my screen's a little small. If you right click where it says, like, if you're over here in MySQL Workbench, if you open up Sakila, you can see like the tables, views, and then this stored procedures. If you right click on stored procedures, you can create a stored procedure, and this will kind of start that template for you, where you can kind of give it a name and then start kind of building it, if you will.
Okay. I think I just typed all that and added tables into my final project database.
Oh, got it. Yep. Yeah.
Boy.
It should be pretty easy. You can just drop the tables. Should just be able to drop the tables pretty easy. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, that's pretty much all I had. I know it was a lot fast, but at least those of you here seem to be getting it pretty well. So hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully you like I really like procedures. Procedures are awesome. I mean, you can kind of see the benefit and really procedures mixed with the transactions. I think that's the real benefit because, I can run a set of things that all kind of chain together without fear of missing something or breaking something if I get halfway through it and get stuck. So it's really nice. A real life example is I actually am part of I work with some fly fishing people, and anyways, we create accounts for people, and in doing so, like, not only do we create an account for them, but we kind of create a couple other assets like a membership, a login, and all kinds of stuff like that. So when we go through that process, it's really easy for me just to, instead of making sure 5 insert statements run, I can create one procedure where I just pass in, a few values, and it all kind of just works. So anyways, play with it and see if you can make it work, because there may be some real value add for your projects. Like I just, kind of mentioned, like, for example, let's say that you're, I'm going to bring this up because I know someone had this. They were doing like a family contact book, and where system users would exist. So basically, if you were going to do that, you first had to insert into user, and then you had to insert into family member. So, if you wanted to quickly say like, oh, we just want everybody, like once a family already exists, we just want to add family members really quickly. You could create a procedure that would just insert that for you. So just a real quick walk through that, I'm going to create a stored procedure, and you would say something like insert into, well, let's create our stuff here. So we're going to create procedure, insert family member. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say in first name, varchar, this is where you give your data type. So let's just say 60, in last name, varchar 60. And then I'm also just going to put in a family name, which is a varchar 60, something like that. And so then what you can do is, and let's add a password. In password. I think that should work. We're going to say insert into user, and then you could go through and kind of do your stuff where you say, first name, last name, password, something along those lines where you can kind of do all your inserts at once instead of having to, go through the process, because then you can just pass in the parameters and have it work. So, like if we were going to insert into family, this one we're going to use and I'm kind of pseudo coding here just a little bit. So like if we want to get our family ID, we say select family ID from family where name is equal to family name. And there's our subquery. And then we can say, so on and so forth. You can kind of get to where you're kind of inserting things very quickly that way if you have to chain things. But anyways, that's all I had. If you have any questions throughout the week, let me know. Otherwise, look forward to the announcement that's going to be coming here in just a few minutes, because I'll have all of the initial data creation statements for you, so you don't have to worry about creating those. You can just run them.
Can I ask a final project question?
Sure. Yep.
Just about the PowerPoint. Are there specific requirements for that?
No. So what I would kind of recommend is, so no specific requirements, but just what I would kind of recommend doing is kind of basically think about it like you're showcasing, like you're pitching your project to actually be built. Like, let's say you're trying to get funding, or you're trying to get your boss to kind of sign off on the project. So what I would do is I would start off by kind of walking through, like what I would do is I'd have one slide that's basically like, what does my project do? Broad overview, and who is it for? And then from there, walk through my UI maps with my process, and kind of highlight, I would use that as kind of a combination to highlight my test cases and my model. So maybe like, and I'm kind of just throwing this off the cuff, but, start with like here's my project. This is what it is, who it's for, what it's going to accomplish. And then the next slide maybe be like, here's our data model. And that's where you can kind of put your ERD. And then from there, walk through your UI map with your test cases and say, so here's how like the user walks through, creating their account. This is where they walk through viewing items. This is where they walk through adding something to their car. This is where they walk through, this is where they check out. Kind of just go through what UI maps you have with and kind of put your test cases, as best you can fit them. Like, it doesn't have to be, perfect.
Okay, so do we record like verbal or video or anything along with it, or just as plain old PowerPoint?
Just plain old PowerPoint. You can just submit it. And so
Okay.
I'm just talking through as if I were presenting it. So that way it, as you're building it, it makes sense. And then, so after walking through the UI map and your test cases, then I would have, and again, those slides can be really fast, just basically your UI map, and maybe just take a couple screenshots of your test cases and draw some arrows, to where the buttons are, kind of a thing, something simple like that. And then once you're done with all your UI map and test cases, then I would kind of shift gears a little bit more into the actual student aspect of it. And then what I really like to see is a slide that's, if you were starting over again, what might you have done differently? And because I think that's just super helpful. And then, you know, you could just end there or have another slide just on generic thoughts if you want a little bit more content. Just, you know, did you enjoy the project? You know, did it take more time than what you thought, less time what you thought, you know, those kinds of things. But that should be adequate.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Can I also ask a question about auto commit?
Yes.
So if you did not turn off auto commit, can you still roll back a transaction in MySQL?
So the answer is no. And that's because if auto commit is on, every statement that you run is committed immediately.
Okay,
So-
so some of the reading made it sound like if it's still within a transaction, you could roll back.
You
Even
know,
if
I
auto
actually,
commit was-
let's test.
Okay,
So if I wanted to, let's say, run another transfer. And then, well, I guess that one's isolated. So that's not a good example. So it's off. Let's delete from transaction. Let's insert into transaction these two. And then I'm going to begin a transaction. Delete them all. And then let's roll back. Okay, so it does look like it does work. So as long as you start a transaction, it won't auto commit in Workbench.
yeah,
That could change, you know what I mean?
right. Yeah,
So
just the questions were confusing on that.
yeah, so it does look like it does work. So as long as you're starting a transaction, it should work. But yeah, otherwise it's going to auto commit everything.
Okay, all right, thank you, that's helpful.
Yep. And I think where that kind of comes into play is really has to do with your session. So like in a session being like, okay, I logged in to MySQL and I authenticated with MySQL. This is my new session. You know, if I want auto commit on, you know, basically everything I run in that session is going to auto commit. If I turn it off, then that whole session will act like a singular transaction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so do you typically just turn it off?
You know, it depends on what I'm doing. I typically leave mine off just because I'm very habitual about always using transactions. I guess it depends. So in a dev instance like this, I leave it on. In a production, but the minute I'm done, like quote, you know, building the database and I'm using the database, I always have auto commit off because I always want the ability to roll back. The problem is you have to get in the habit of like, okay, I'm doing my work and commit, you know, once, because you can forget to commit and then kind of lose things or get this huge kind of expense on your server of it logging tons of things. So,
Okay,
yeah, good questions.
thank you.
Yep. Good question. All right. Well, I will let you guys go. Like I said, I'm going to send over this code here pretty much immediately. Basically, I'm just going to get the link for YouTube so I can post it in there when I post it. So the YouTube video might not be working right when I send it, but that way you have the code and you guys can start working. So anyways, thanks for being here. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.